But with plenty of sunny spells, cloud making its way in from the west, just bringing some outbreaks of light rain and drizzle across northern and western areas to start Tuesday. And the weather isn't set to change too much throughout the rest of next week, although we might see some rain around midweek, and temperatures will remain at or just above average.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farrah, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrah.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamonn Holmes back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamonn. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamonn Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in my big opinion, the scandal of NHS waste. It's enough to make you sick. My Mark Meets guest is one of the most outspoken politicians in the country, Nigel Farage's former right-hand man at UKIP, David Campbell Bannerman. In the big question, is Tory MP Lee Anderson a hero or a villain? And in the news agenda with my panel, is vaping an antisocial nuisance? Is it time to stub out e-cigarettes? Also, is Britain now vulnerable to foreign attack? And is swearing at the office a sackable offence? We'll get to all of that after the headlines with Bethany Elsey.
Mark, thank you. Good evening. Here's your top stories from the GB newsroom. The number of people who've been killed in the earthquakes that hit Turkey and Syria on Monday has risen to 33,000. Officials say the window for finding survivors is closing, but several children were pulled from the rubble alive today, including a 9-year-old boy who spent almost a week under a collapsed building. An appeal by the UK's Disasters Emergency Committee has raised more than £60 million in just 3 days. The Labour Party is urging the BBC chair to consider his position after MPs found he breached standards when applying for the role. A cross-party committee says Richard Sharp made significant errors of judgment when he failed to declare that he'd helped Boris Johnson to secure a loan when he was Prime Minister. Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell is questioning whether he's still able to uphold trust and independence in the broadcaster.
I think this damning report, it really is an unprecedented report, means that Mr Sharp's position is increasingly untenable, and he really should now reflect on whether he's able to carry out that very important role as the BBC chair to uphold public trust and independence of the BBC.
Warrington police have launched a murder investigation after a 16-year-old girl was found stabbed to death in a park in Cheshire yesterday. Brianna Ghey was found by members of the public with multiple stab wounds near Linear Park. Emergency services arrived, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. The force is looking to speak with 2 people described as a white man and woman. The chair of the Defence Committee is urging Rishi Sunak to boost defence spending due to threats of a new Cold War. Tory MP Tobias Ellwood told GB News we need more money to replace military equipment and deal with aggression from Russia and China. It comes after reports that some NATO allies are concerned about the UK's military readiness. And a high-altitude object tracked over northern Canada that officials say posed a threat to civilian aircraft has been shot down over Yukon territory. It's the 3rd object to have been shot down over North America in the past week, which at least one top US lawmaker says is another suspected Chinese spy balloon. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says his forces will now recover and analyse the wreckage. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
My thanks to Bethany Elsey, who returns in an hour's time. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. Busy show. In my big opinion, in just a moment, the scandal of NHS waste. It's enough to make you sick. In the big question, is Tory MP Lee Anderson a hero or a villain? We'll debate that with Anne Widdecombe. My Mark Meets guest is a man who's never short of an opinion or two, the former MEP David Campbell Bannerman, who was right-hand man to Nigel Farage at UKIP. And in the news agenda, is vaping an antisocial nuisance? Is it time to stub out e-cigarettes? Also, is Britain now vulnerable to foreign attack, given the problems that we've got with our defence? Is swearing at work a sackable offence? And does being nice get you anywhere in life? We'll discuss that later in the show. Reacting to those stories and many more, my fantastic panel tonight. The political editor of both the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday People, Nigel Two Jobs Nelson. The historian David Oldroyd Bolt. And the political and social commentator, Lynn May. Now, I want to hear from you throughout the show. Mark at gbnews.uk. This show's all about opinions, especially yours. And this programme has a golden rule. We don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it. So for the next 2 hours, big debates, big guests, and always big opinions. Let's start with this one. You may need a lie down after hearing this and some smelling salts. The Telegraph report that the NHS is currently paying six-figure salaries to 3,500 managers. Statistics from the Department of Health and Social Care also show that the number of senior bureaucrats employed by the service has risen by 16% in just 3 years. There are now over 36,500 bureaucrats within the NHS, up from 33,000 in December 2019. How can our health service, which is paid for from the public purse, your money and mine, sleepwalk into hiring thousands more people on huge six-figure salaries? There aren't too many examples in the private sector of people being recruited and the wage bill exploding accidentally or without anyone really noticing. In the private sector, the wage bill doesn't swell automatically. But when you and I are paying for it, it's another story. As with the entirety of the public sector, when it's taxpayers' money, we're always taken for mugs. We know about the diabolical waste in the health service, with hospital trusts paying over the odds for a packet of paracetamol that you can buy for 50p at Morrison's. There are contractors charging a small fortune to change a light bulb or replace a carpet tile. And don't get me started on diversity officers for the most diverse workforce on God's earth. The public sector has a problem with cash. Whilst private companies work ruthlessly to police their incomings and outgoings, and with the very survival of the business dependent on the balance sheets and the bottom line, in the public sector, when it's taxpayers' money, it's money no object. It's often boasted that the NHS is the biggest employer in Europe. It's the biggest employer in Europe. Why is that a boast? That, in my view, is an admission of its outrageous inefficiency. The NHS should treat more people and employ fewer. Yes, we need more doctors and nurses, absolutely. But pen-pushing middle managers, not so much. Whoever wins the next election must conduct an almighty war on waste. And the best place to start is these fat cat salaries for NHS managers who have presided over a service which is getting both more expensive and worse by the day. And these NHS managers, as part of the leadership of our health service, were behind the NHS's, in my view, disastrous response to COVID, in which it focused on the containment of a seasonal respiratory virus at the expense of far worse illnesses like cancer, type 2 diabetes and dementia. Even now, when you go into an NHS hospital, they're still drinking the COVID Kool-Aid with ridiculous signs for social distancing, plastic screens everywhere, and half the staff wearing those filthy, worthless face rags. I hasten to add, many of them just wear those masks on their chin or below their nose. Follow the science. Now, with mask mandates, with a focus on containing the spread of COVID within hospital settings, the NHS would argue they were trying to save lives and prevent the service from being overwhelmed. I understand they were doing their best, but I beg to differ in terms of strategy, as perfectly healthy doctors and nurses were forced to stay at home for weeks on end during the pingdemic, when their phone alerted them after they'd been in contact with someone that, horror of horrors, had tested positive for COVID. Yes, COVID was a potentially nasty virus, but one mild and non-fatal to almost everyone. Well, thanks to the COVID hysteria, encouraged by fat cat NHS middle management, the NHS is certainly overwhelmed now. These six-figure middle managers are responsible for a waiting list of over 7 million people and a health system on the verge of collapse. Please don't mention money, given the fact that the health service is estimated now to cost each household in the country £13,000 a year. Now, I'm not saying this is a good thing, but you could pay a fraction of that to go private. NHS managers have presided over a service in which the population is getting iller and fatter by the decade. Until you tackle public health and obesity, which is a gateway drug to every other illness you can think of, the service will never be viable. The nurses and the doctors are great, but the once envied National Health Service is becoming an expensive joke. It's enough to make you sick. What's your view? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Mark at gbnews.uk. As I've said, the NHS would argue they need those middle managers. They've got to pay top dollar. Without them, people would die. The health service would be worse. Many of these middle managers, it's argued, work miracles every day to get people their operations and to keep a Byzantine system going. But what's your view? Let me know. This show's all about opinions. Let's get the views now of my all-star panel. We have Nigel Nelson, who is the political editor of the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday People, political and social commentator Lynn May, and historian David Oldroyd-Bolt. Lynn, may I start with you if I can? What's your view on this? As far as I'm concerned, this level of waste, 3,500 people on a six-figure salary at the NHS is deeply wrong.
I just can't seem to get my head around this because the NHS, on average, wastes about 7.6 billion every single year. And we constantly hear the government getting blamed. Now, I'm not saying the government can't do more. However, no one ever seems to bring up Amanda Pritchard, who is the chief exec. What has she been doing to ensure that the money is going where it's supposed to be? And when it comes to these strikes as well, why are we not asking the NHS what have they been doing with their money? Why are they wasting literally billions of pounds a year?
Indeed, David Oldroyd-Bolt, I don't think anybody that works in the NHS should be getting rich, especially if they don't have a direct role in terms of patient care.
You said in your monologue that this was by mistake, that this had been sleepwalked into. I'm afraid I take a rather more cynical view that this explosion of middle management began under the Labour government of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown as a way of shoring up their vote. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas, and NHS middle managers on healthy salaries don't vote Tory. I think that this has continued under the 13 years of Conservative-led government because they were too frightened to take on the NHS, because they were worried that they would be painted by the left-wing press as attacking the NHS, as privatising it by the back door, as they've said about the Tories and the NHS ever since its foundation in 1948. The big problem is that we are the ones footing the bill for this perfidy and for this cowardice on the part of the Tory government, and it's about time it stopped. We cannot afford this. The NHS system doesn't work. It is too large, it is bureaucratically unwieldy, it doesn't deliver good health outcomes. The people of this country are being failed by it, and it's about time we stepped back, took a deep breath and realised we need a Royal Commission to look at the future of health service in this country.
Do you want, David, to give me your elevator pitch as to what your health system would look like in this country if you ruled the world?
Well, I'm going to say something that I hope that the Remainer contingent of our viewership, which is probably quite small, would agree with. Look to Europe. They have a very good system of health on the continent. In any country you can name, they have part private, part public health provision. They have far better health outcomes than we do. This is the case across most of the globe. America is the canard in this. Every time we talk about reforming the NHS, people say, well, you want an American system. No, we don't. We just want what they have in Germany and in France and in Italy and in Belgium and in Holland and in any other first world country you can think to name, where people don't die because they're waiting years, where people aren't treated as though they are an encumbrance upon a service, which they are here, and where people are not treated with disdain whenever they try to complain about the bad service they're receiving.
Which part would you privatise, though? That's the only concern of mine.
Well, I think the NHS needs to be taken apart and put back together again. It's just incapable of being reformed. We've been trying this now since 1948 to make it work better. It doesn't work. It can't work because there is no way that a nation can direct health provision.
Well, actually, to answer your question, Lynn May, I would suggest that every single service that the NHS provides to the public should be competed for by the public and private sector. There's an element of that already, but I would ramp that up by 100%. Let's talk to Nigel Nelson. Nigel, many would defend the NHS and say without these managers who get a bad press, More people would die, less operations would happen. They are simply propping up a complex and Byzantine system.
Well, I mean, I think there probably are too many managers in the NHS, but the point is the NHS does need managing. As you've pointed out, it's the biggest employer in Europe. It's the 5th largest in the world, with only McDonald's, Walmart, the Chinese Army and the US Defence Department above that. So you've got to have managers doing their job. The question is, if they do they do it well enough? One of the problems with things like waiting lists is that they're not being managed properly. So what you need to do is have a system where you know where beds are, where you can put patients, how to get them into hospital as quickly as possible on ambulances. That's a job not for clinicians, that's a job for managers. So the important thing is that they do their job properly. I do agree with David. I think that we're heading to the point where the NHS will need to be taken apart and properly reformed so we have a real national health service.
Even Keir Starmer has said the NHS is no longer a sacred cow. I've heard Labour MPs saying it's not about money anymore. So it is time for a national conversation. Let's have it tonight. What's your view, your appraisal of the NHS? How do you feel about your money going to 3,500 middle managers on a 6-figure salary? Let me know. Mark at gbnews.uk. My Mark Meets guest is Nigel Farage's former right-hand man, David Campbell Bannerman. What a character. He's live after 10. But next in the big question, Lee Anderson, Tory MP, Deputy Party Chairman. Is he a hero or villain? We'll debate that next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. The best bit of my show is when you get in touch. I just love your emails because you talk common sense. You say it like it is. A big reaction to my big opinion. I'm talking about waste in the NHS. 3,500 middle managers on six-figure salaries. This from Philip. Philip, great email. Can't read the whole thing because of time. But headlines are, dear Mark, every year in the winter we hear how the NHS is under strain and needs more funding. Governments over the years throw funding its way, increasing every year. Despite this, we get the same chance, under strain, more funding needed. The NHS needs to be reorganised to ensure that better value for money is achieved. A start can be made by axing all green, inclusivity and equality management positions and non-medical positions like Executive Director of People and Culture and Transformational Facilitator. What the hell's that? I was hoping I was one of those. Jeff says if the NHS was a company, it would be looking at voluntary redundancies. And Yvonne says, Mark, my friend worked in a London hospital and every day watched people who'd flown in from overseas to either give birth or have major surgery and then leave without paying a penny. Thanks for that. Keep those emails coming, Mark, at gbnews.uk. It's time for this. Yes, it's time for the big question in which we tackle a major news story of the day. And the newly appointed Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson, has received criticism from some politicians and several high-profile figures in the media for suggesting we should bring back the death penalty for the worst crimes. He also raised eyebrows by saying voters are sick to death of hearing about net zero and that it's not a vote winner. Mr Anderson, a former miner and previously lifelong Labour supporter, has also labelled the civil service as one of the biggest problems in the country, suggesting officials still held Blairite views that led to woke nonsense in Whitehall. Anderson also urged the Royal Navy frigates to ferry asylum seekers straight back to France to solve the migrant crisis. Even a colleague on his own side, Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood, damned him with faint praise on the Camilla Tominey show here on GB News this morning. How about this for a ringing endorsement? Not.
Lee Anderson seems to be very popular, Tobias.
I mean, are we having a serious conversation here? You know, leading the country,
yes.
You need to be able to command all tribes in the Conservative Party from the centre ground and appeal to the whole of the nation, not just to a particular angle, a particular cohort, a particular part of the spectrum, which I appreciate Lee Anderson does very well indeed, not least on your programme.
Blimey, represents a cohort. By the way, isn't Camilla fantastic? She's back on Sunday morning. So is Lee Anderson a principled man of the people or a loudmouthed self-publicist? Is he a hero or a villain? That's tonight's big question. To debate this, I'm delighted to welcome former Conservative Government Minister, best-selling author and TV personality Anne Widdecombe, plus a writer, political commentator and Labour Party councillor Fatima Kamara. Fatima, your view of Lee Anderson?
Hi, Mark. Good evening, and thank you for once again inviting me to, well, I would say put my 2 cents into this conversation. I think certainly depends on who you're asking and who you're talking to. Certainly, from my point of view, Lee Anderson is definitely not speaking on our behalf, or my behalf, certainly. I think with regards to, he's kind of stirred up a lot of negative press and negative attention, in my view. I think just the first thing that he's actually mentioned that actually I don't hear anyone talking about in depth is about this is infamous quote about, the death sentence, so to speak. What no one is talking about is we as a country, the United Kingdom, actually we've signed up to the ECHR, and actually just even mentioning about that is just, it just kind of throws me. And actually also, yes, he's done quite, phenomenal things in Mansfield. He's coming from a mining community, a mining background. He's lived there for years and everything like that. He's actually, got the clout with the local people. But what I would say is certainly he's not speaking for everyone. He's not speaking for everyone from that mining community. He's definitely, yes, he's been appointed by Rishi Sunak. And I think what that does, and actually Tobias said it, it's actually appointing him with every sort of speech and every sort of, every sort of thing that he stands for in terms of all his conversation and all his little rhetoric is actually not helping the situation. We are in a cost of living crisis. We need to now look and listen to the people and what people are going through. Saying that people don't know how to cook and they can actually cook a meal with a 30p, using 30p, and they need to be taught about budgeting. They need to be taught about certain things and not actually addressing the issue. I think for me, it just kind of just deflects in terms of what we're really dealing with as a nation and as a community.
Anne Widdecombe, Lee Anderson, hero or villain?
Absolute hero. When I listened to Tobias Ellwood, I could almost hear David Cameron speaking. People who are just focused on the metropolitan elite, no idea what's going on in the rest of the country. And Lee Anderson connects with, now, you can dismiss it as a cohort if you like, but it's a cohort that regularly feels itself neglected and therefore doesn't tend to vote. And he is speaking for them. Now, when he says, that if you're using food banks when you're earning over 30,000, you need help with budgeting, believe me, there are loads of people at home in those red wall areas and elsewhere who are budgeting sacrificially at the moment in order to cope with the cost of living crisis and who are managing. Sometimes on much less than 30,000. And they're saying, yes, you're right. And I think what we've forgotten is stop patronising people, which is what the Tories tend to do. Stop patronising people and understand how they see things and speak for them. And he is actually speaking for quite a large section of the population for whom normally nobody speaks.
And the political genius of Tony Blair was keeping John Prescott. Do you think that Lee Anderson could do a similar job for Rishi Sunak, providing a voice for real working people?
Well, I think he'd do a darn sight better job than John Prescott. But yes, I think there is something in that analogy. We don't tend to have a voice raised on behalf of what you describe as real people, what I would describe as the forgotten decents. The people who try to live decent lives and everything is against them. And he is speaking for them. And let's make this very clear. He didn't say bring back capital punishment. He said that there was an argument for capital punishment. I've been saying that for years. When I was Shadow Home Secretary, I didn't campaign to bring it back because, we were in the ECHR. We couldn't if we wanted to, and it was a waste of time. But my, attitude now is get out of the ECHR on a whole load of other grounds.
Fatima, briefly, if you can, the clock's against us. I wonder whether Labour should be careful about disowning or criticising Lee Anderson too harshly, partly because he was in your ranks for about 5 decades as a lifelong Labour supporter, but also Lee Anderson is a man who's very popular in those red wall constituencies, those Labour voters who supported Boris Johnson in 2019. You're going to need to win those voters back, and they like Lee Anderson.
Mark, what Rishi Sunak has done clearly is he knows that there's, if there was an election called today or tomorrow, that the Conservative Party would not stand a chance. So he's deflected and actually just brought in Lee Anderson to actually be able to communicate with those people where those people cannot relate to Rishi Sunak at all. So he's kind of cleverly done that. But what I would say, Lee Anderson had the choice which party he wanted to belong to. But what I would say is a day in politics, anything can happen. And I'll be really interested to see how this all pans out in terms of Lee Anderson going forward within the Conservative Party, certainly.
Briefly, Anne, final thought. I wonder whether he is both an asset and a thorn in the side to the Prime Minister. Popular in the Red Wall for his no-nonsense approach, but a controversial and divisive figure in Middle England Conservative seats where the threat comes from the Liberal Democrats.
You're just describing Norman Tebbit, who was referred to as a semi-house-trained polecat. That is who you're describing. And everybody, every leader actually needs one of those around. And I think that is the function that Lee Anderson discharges. And yes, it's quite true that a day in politics, a lot of things can happen. But in 2 years, before an election, I think this guy will achieve a lot.
Anne Widdecombe, great to have you on the show as always. We'll see you in a week's time. And also, what an absolute delight and a warm welcome back to the show to Labour Party councillor, political commentator Fatima Kamara. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Well, look, we put out a text poll asking you what you think. Is Lee Anderson a hero or villain? Well, 40% say he's a hero, 60% say he is a villain. Thanks to everyone that voted. Coming up, my Mark Meets guest is Nigel Farage's former right-hand man, David Campbell Bannerman. What a lively character. He's on after 10. Plus, tomorrow's papers. But next, vaping. Is it antisocial? Is it a filthy habit? Should we stub it out? We'll debate that next.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan tonight. Is Tory MP Lee Anderson a hero or a villain? Quick email here, which speaks for so many emails that I've received. Alan, good evening, Alan. How are you? Alan has said, Mark, Lee says what people on the streets think. If only his peers got the message, Sunak could have the best ammunition in his armoury. Top man, a man of the people, for the people, especially most working Red Wall voters. Alan, thank you for that. Keep those emails coming. Let's talk now, can we, about vaping. Do you vape? With news that thousands of children are being illegally sold vapes featuring fruity flavours and colourful packaging, And given that environmental groups have called for action on the hazardous waste from these e-cigarettes, are they really the best way to get people off the fags? Is vaping a good alternative to tobacco or an antisocial nuisance and a threat to children's health? Is it time to stub out e-cigarettes? Let's speak to Colleen Dwyer from the world-renowned Alan Carr Clinic. Their Easy Way programme, which has spawned several globally best-selling books, has helped millions of people to give up smoking, gambling, eating sugar, mobile phone addiction, drinking and even e-cigarettes. In fact, their latest book is on that very subject. It's called Alan Carr's Easy Way to Quit Vaping. Colleen, welcome to Mark Dolan tonight.
Hello, Mark. Very pleased to be here.
Congratulations on everything that you've done for so many people that have bought these books. Vaping, what's your view? Should we stub it out?
Well, we're very keen to help anyone who is smoking to quit, and obviously e-cigarettes were brought to the market with that intention. But what we're seeing is how the youth now, the next generation, is starting to pick up vaping. And of course, that was never the intention. It's not desirable. It's a pointless activity. And it's a real waste to see, children falling into the nicotine trap.
Do we know, Colleen, whether vaping is healthier than smoking? Is it the lesser of two evils? Is it harmless?
Well, it's certainly, I wouldn't say it was harmless, and we certainly need more research into the long-term, mid-term effects as well of vaping. And, common sense kind of dictates that it's not a very healthy thing to do to inhale vapor. But it probably is less harmful than tobacco smoking.
But the problem is it contains nicotine, which is extraordinarily addictive. Can you just give us a sense of how addictive nicotine is and how hard it is to kick?
Well, nicotine is the most addictive substance known to mankind, and just one dose of the drug would be enough to get you hooked. So, with a vape, it's highly addictive. So it wouldn't take much for a youngster to find themselves in that cycle of wanting to vape and not being able to stop.
Is this the tobacco industry just finding a new income stream? Because I felt like we had a rare opportunity in our history to get tobacco out of our lives. But then they brought e-cigarettes out as a way of getting people off the fags, and it feels to me like back to square one.
Precisely. It's there was high hopes for e-cigarettes to get people to finally finish, their nicotine addiction for good, but that's not what we're seeing. I mean, we highlighted the dangers of it back in the day when they first came out, and sadly, we're seeing our predictions come to fruition.
Full disclosure, I've run out. I've literally run out of the number of people that have taken the Easy Way method, which is what you do, that's had amazing success. I think 6 or 7 million copies of the smoking book. Alan Carr, no longer with us, absolute genius. I've got to say, the Easy Way is easy. It's brilliant. So bravo to you. Obviously, other alternatives are available, including your GP. But if you're struggling with cigarettes or any other addictive substance, do give the Alan Carr Easy Way method a go. If I can, Colleen, let's bring my panel in on this. We've got David Oldroyd-Bolt, Nigel Nelson and Lynn May. Nigel, I'm curious what you think. You come from Fleet Street and those smoke-filled offices, at least back in the day. Do you think we should stub out e-cigarettes?
No. I am both a smoker and a vapor. I rather hope that the vaping will actually take over from the cigarettes. And when it comes to children, we've had this problem all along, that when there are only cigarettes around, children got their hands on them. They were much more fashionable when I was a youngster than they are today. The same thing applies to vapes. The important thing there is there should be proper policing of this. It's down to the shops to not to sell them to young people. So that is where the effort should go. Vaping may not be ideal, but it probably is a better alternative to tobacco.
OK, David Oldroyd-Bolt, I guess you're a libertarian, so you wouldn't want us to dictate to people what they smoke or don't smoke.
Well, as a former and very, very enthusiastic smoker, I found vapes to be useful. I think they are, from every study I've been able to see so far, less harmful. They don't contain carcinogens, for instance. The problem I had with vapes is that when they first come out, you could smoke them pretty much everywhere. You could use them everywhere. And one can use them inside the house without causing terrible smells. So, in fact, my nicotine dependence rose rather than fell. I think the idea that they should be taxed more is ludicrous. One of the reasons that people use vapes, I'm sure, is because they are cheaper than cigarettes, so they're a viable alternative. If you make them the same price as cigarettes, why would people switch? They might as well just carry on with the thing that they already know is bad for them. They know it's bad for them because they are told every time they buy a packet of cigarettes and they see those rather ghastly pictures on the front and back. If children are buying them, that is, as Nigel says, a problem with the policing of them. It is not a problem with the things themselves.
Lynn May, the issue that many would argue is that vaping is quite antisocial. You know, you sit there, perhaps you're watching a football match or you're just walking down the street, you're in a cafe or you're outside and you get this cloud of steam and it's banana flavoured or mango flavoured. It's just another irritant, isn't it, in daily life? It's just antisocial. E-cigarettes are a nuisance.
Well, no, I don't agree with it being antisocial. You can say anything's antisocial. You can say being on your phone's antisocial.
But I've got to breathe in that smoky, steamy rubbish.
I think some of them smell quite nice, to be honest. The only thing I would say is, I know people say, you know, it's nowhere near as bad. However, the nicotine content, you can decide how much you have, but they oftentimes are a lot more than cigarettes. The National Institute of Health has just published an article saying that there's a lot of damage to blood vessels now as well. And I think that even though children were getting hold of cigarettes, I don't think there was that appeal for even younger children. Now they're all these different fruits, colours, and they're easy to get on the internet. So I do think there does need to be a bit of discouragement when it comes to who purchases these vapes, because it is not good for young children to also get into the habit of being addicted to something.
Yeah.
People may not want to admit this, but addiction is a bad thing. If you feel you need to have something, enjoyment is different. But if you feel you have to depend on something, addiction should not be something that a child has to deal with at such a young age.
OK, look, just a few seconds left. Colleen, I think you were quite a heavy smoker. You became a sort of disciple of the Alan Carr easy way technique, and it is easy, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I just want to echo what you said there, which is it's not nice being dependent on anything. Even if there's no harm associated with it, no one wants to be psychologically dependent on anything. So I was very happy to be freed from my addiction.
Brilliant. How can people find out more about what you do?
AlanCarr.com. So, just go online and we have a whole range of problems that Alan Carr's method's been applied to.
Worth a try, I would say, from personal experience. I think it's genius. However, if you're also worried about any addiction, do seek professional help. You've got the Alan Carr, but you've got your GP and lots of voluntary organisations as well. Wonderful to have you on the show. My thanks to Colleen for that fascinating debate. That was indeed fascinating. So there you go. That was Colleen Dwyer. Lots more to come. My Mark Meets guest is Nigel Farage's former right-hand man, remarkable guy, David Campbell Bannerman. I'll be asking him what he thinks of Brexit. But next, does Britain face the threat of foreign attack? See you shortly.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back to the show. Now, today's Mail on Sunday reports that NATO chiefs fear that Britain's military forces are so overstretched that they're not fit to be on the front line of the defence against Russia. This according to sources. The UK is due to take over leadership of NATO's Rapid Reaction Force from Germany at the end of the year. But reports in the German media, backed up by Ministry of Defence sources in the UK, claim that NATO has asked Berlin to remain in charge for an extra year because Britain cannot spare the 5,000 personnel required. There's even a suggestion that Britain, wait for it, has run out of bullets. This story brings the issue of defence funding into sharp focus and begs the wider question, notwithstanding our challenges in supporting NATO, is Britain increasingly at risk of foreign attack? Joining me now to discuss this is the former NATO commander and a former Ministry of Defence Director General, Rear Admiral Chris Parry, CBE. Chris, thank you so much for your time. First of all, your reaction to the fact that this great nation, a country that, alongside the Allies, defeated Germany in the Second World War, is running out of bullets.
Well, good evening, everybody. I don't think we are running out of bullets. If we are running out of bullets, we're not running out of much else. You always get this sort of hysteria whenever there's an imminent defence review or revision, in this case, of the integrated review. And all sorts of lobbies start sort of putting things out there saying they're short of this, they're short of that. The fact of life is the integrated review of last year is a pretty good framework for how Britain should shape its defence into the 21st century. I don't think they've worked out how it's going to be equipped, manned and resourced properly yet. But as a basic framework, it's not bad. We're the leading maritime nation in Europe. We've got the most advanced air force. And we've got an army that is fit for defending this country and contributing to NATO. It's pretty rich of the Germans to come back and say, when they only spend 1.1% of their GDP, that the Brits can't take over from them. We spend more than 2% of our GDP. And frankly, right now, the Germans are in the position of being the pot that's calling the kettle black.
And Germany's response to the Ukraine invasion was slow at best, wasn't it, Chris? Is this an example of Britain bashing then?
Yeah, there's a bit of that. I mean, it won't be long before Brexit is mentioned and all this sort of thing. The fact of life is Britain is probably the leading military power in Europe. There's no question about that. We've got nuclear and conventional forces that can compete with the best, but they're designed to take part within an alliance. And the strongest part of that alliance is the United States. And there isn't one European country that can actually stand up to Russia without the contribution of the United States. And everybody accepts that. So right now, I think we just need to calm down. Remember that we're the furthest geographically from Russia of any country in Europe. We've got the best tank trap in Europe in the English Channel. And we need to leave the Panzer stuff, which everybody's crowing about at the moment, to those that need it the most and can afford it the most as well. We need to be really careful that we don't make general lessons out of what's happening in Ukraine. I've written recently that Ukraine is the last war of the 20th century, not the first war of the 21st.
This is proving to be a very helpful and illuminating conversation, Chris. Can we talk about defence spending? Why should my viewers and listeners really care about defence spending when they're struggling to heat their homes and pay the bills?
Well, we all should worry about it. We're all taxpayers, Mark. I am as well. The fact of life is, if you don't make the right decisions about defence and security, you don't get to make those decisions about all the other things like heating. Just ask most of the people in Ukraine about their heating at the moment. The Russians have devastated it with their missiles and other attack systems. And, you know, a third of the population right now is shivering. Now, that's not a situation we want to be in. We need to deter coercion. We need to deter our potential opponents and say to them, look, if you come our way, you're going to get a nasty surprise. Now, there are some areas that we need to take into account from the Ukraine war. For example, not many of your viewers will realize that the missiles that the Russians are using right now against Ukraine have the range and capability to hit the United Kingdom directly. And so that's something we need to tighten up on. There are a number of other things to do with unmanned and drone warfare that we need to accelerate our procurement plans for. And I know across all three services that is happening. But the fact of life is it's not just Russia. We've got other people who don't like us very much. The Chinese, the Iranians, the North Koreans. So we need to keep our armor bright if we're going to make our way in the world and we're going to defend our allies and ourselves.
I don't wish, Chris, to add to the hysteria. I like your calm and measured tone, which is why I've got no doubt you were an extraordinary rear admiral. But give it to me straight. What is the worst case scenario for Britain if we neglect defence spending?
The worst case scenario is that nobody will take this country seriously. And the fact of life is if you can't organise your own defence and security, you can't really organise much else. I think people often say in this country, when the armed forces go to the dogs, then every other institution will have gone. So it is a hallmark of our country. You know, we've got a good, proud military tradition. We're capable of using it for good around the world. We need to continue to do so for our own morale's sake. I'll give you an example. I was in the Falklands War in 1982, and the country we left had really experienced the winter of discontent. There were trade union strikes. The country didn't actually feel very good about itself. 5 months later, I came back and it was a different country. It had a spring in its step and everybody thought, actually, this country is worth fighting for. It's actually worth working for as well. And my hope is that, you know, we can actually galvanize this great country and say, look, we've led from the front with regard to what's happening in Ukraine. We're going to help save Ukraine from an absolutely dreadful regime in Moscow. And because of that, and I think you remember, Mark, the younger Pitt said, you know, we hope during the Napoleonic Wars that Britain will save itself by its exertions and Europe by its example. And I think that's a very good motto for today, to tell you the truth.
A great motto indeed, and I salute you and your colleagues for your work in the Falklands. Very briefly, if you can, we've got to get to the news. What is your appraisal of the war in Ukraine? Is this going to be the forever war, as was described to me by the historian Martin Whittock?
Well, the way I see it going at the moment, and I've been looking at some of the indicators at the moment, is we're about to see a major Russian push, possibly on more than one front. I think you're going to have the major push in the southeast, in the Donetsk and Luhansk region. There may be a thrust against Odessa and against Kiev from Belarus. I think once the Russians have had that push, and hopefully it's failed, I think they'll try and settle on the lands that they've already taken. They'll consolidate their position there. And I think you'll settle down in what we call a frozen conflict. And it will be a bit like North Korea, South Korea were at the end of the Korean War. And you'll have stuff going on across the front lines sporadically, I think. What Russia will try and do is wear down the West and get us to think that it's all over. And they'll keep prodding away, I suspect. I don't think Putin's long for this world. I think everybody agrees he's either got Parkinson's or cancer. I think there's going to be a power struggle in the Kremlin at some stage, but don't think it's going to get any better in the Kremlin. They're all like it.
Blimey, what a comprehensive and illuminating answer. Chris, a privilege to have you on the show. Former Ministry of Defence Director General, Rear Admiral Chris Parry, CBE. Next up, in my take at 10, why we're being blackmailed by the EU and what we can do about it. That's my take at 10. Don't go anywhere.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farrah, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrah.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamonn Holmes back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamonn. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamonn Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
It's 10 o'clock and this is Mark Dolan tonight. In my take at 10 in just a moment, why we're being blackmailed by the EU and what we can do about it. My Mark Meets guest is a politician who's never short of an opinion. The former MEP David Campbell Bannerman, former right-hand man to Nigel Farage, former deputy leader of UKIP. He'll be dropping some truth bombs in my Mark Meets session at 10:15. Plus, we'll take our first look at tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 sharp. In the news agenda with my panel, is swearing at work a sackable offence? And does being nice get you anywhere in life? It never helped me. Lots to get through, but first the headlines with the always nice Bethany Elsey.
Mark, thank you. Good evening. Here's your top stories from the GB newsroom. And in the last hour, the US military has shot down another high-altitude object over Lake Huron in Michigan. It's the fourth time fighter pilots have shot down unidentified objects over North America in the past week. The first one was a suspected Chinese spy balloon brought down last weekend. Since then, two more objects were shot down, one over Alaska and another over Canada. Officials say they're still recovering and analysing the wreckage. The number of people who've been killed in the earthquakes that hit Turkey and Syria on Monday has risen to 33,000. Officials say the window for finding survivors is closing, but several children were pulled from the rubble alive today, including a 9-year-old boy who spent almost a week under a collapsed building. An appeal by the UK's Disasters Emergency Committee has raised more than £60 million in just 3 days. And some more breaking news in the past half an hour. A girl and a boy, both aged 15, have been arrested on suspicion of murder following the fatal stabbing of a 16-year-old girl in a park in Cheshire. Brianna Ghey from Warrington was found by members of the public with serious injuries on a pathway near Culcheth Linear Park yesterday afternoon. Emergency services arrived, but she died at the scene. And the Labour Party is urging the BBC chair to consider his position after MPs found he breached standards when applying for the role. A cross-party committee says Richard Sharp made significant errors of judgment when he failed to declare that he'd helped Boris Johnson to secure a loan when he was Prime Minister. Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell is questioning whether he's still able to uphold trust and independence in the broadcaster.
This damning report, it really is an unprecedented report, means that Mr Sharp's position is increasingly untenable, and he really should now reflect on whether he's able to carry out that very important role as the BBC chair to uphold public trust and independence of the BBC.
You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark.
My thanks to Bethany, who returns in an hour's time. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. Big stories, big guests, and always big opinions. In the news agenda with my panel, what do you think about swearing in the office? Have you heard a colleague swear? I'm sure you have. Is it a sackable offence? Should you get in trouble if you swear at work? Is it the wrong thing to do? Or should we let people express themselves? Also, does being nice get you anywhere in life? We'll discuss that shortly. Plus tomorrow's papers at exactly 10:30 sharp with full panel reaction. Very excited about my Mark Meets guest tonight. Outspoken politician David Campbell Bannerman. Nigel Farage's former right-hand man, ex-deputy leader of UKIP. He wrote the UKIP manifesto in 2010, which was a very popular one. What does he think about Brexit? What's his appraisal of how it's going? And what does he think of my colleague, Nigel Farage? That's David C. Bannerman in just a few minutes. But first, my take at 10. EU wouldn't believe it. We're being bullied and blackmailed by Brussels. Thank God we're out. In the context of a wider impasse in relation to that wretched Northern Ireland protocol which divides our country down the Irish Sea, Brussels is digging its heels in on an agreement for Britain to be a member of a multi-billion-pound science collaboration called Horizon. Well, let me tell you, there's trouble on the horizon. Because under the impressive stewardship of Michelle Donelan, our brand new Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, Britain is willing to walk away. A strategy that worked fantastically well when Britain finally talked tough with the EU during Brexit negotiations, and when at the time Lord Frost made it clear to our friends and neighbours across the Channel that Britain meant business, and if a satisfactory deal wasn't available, We were off-ski. Well, a comprehensive free trade agreement followed. It tells you everything you need to know about the culture of the EU, which is not a cuddly, reciprocal, collegiate, collaborative organisation. Far from it. The EU is a vast political monolith which exists only to serve its own interests. I honestly don't think it even cares about its individual member states. Look how they treated Greece. And the one-size-fits-all currency, the euro, is a disaster for Italian exports, for example. And it says so much about the culture of that organisation that they're willing to sacrifice scientific enlightenment and progress for political gain. That's nothing new. They were willing to sacrifice their economic self-interest when they spent years blocking a trade deal with the United Kingdom. And let's not forget their outrageous behaviour after they messed up and hadn't ordered enough vaccines. They were seeking to blockade Britain's supply. The Commission President Ursula von der Leyen briefly threatened to erect a hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, something they claimed they were against during Brexit negotiations and which they used as an excuse not to grant us a deal. No empathy, no morals, no integrity, total hypocrisy. To make science a political pawn is unforgivable, and so Dolan has made it clear to these bullying Brussels bureaucrats that we will seek an independent partnership with Switzerland, Japan and the United States, if you've heard of them. No slouches in the old science department. It doesn't have to be this way. Britain is a European country. We have a long and shared history with our continental cousins, not least almost 5 decades of EU and previously EEC membership. The unfortunate reality for Europe is that whilst they try to characterise Brexit as a disaster and that Britain has been impoverished as a result, I'm not sure that sticks, given the fact that this country was the fastest growing economy in the G7 last year. Everyone and their grandma wants to move here, and we avoided recession in the last quarter of 2022 and may avoid it altogether in 2023. Meanwhile, Germany, deep in recession. You're welcome. You'll never get away from the fact that Britain imports more from the EU than we sell to them. So we are, by an order of magnitude, the customer for their goods and services, and we can take our business elsewhere. Punishing Britain for Brexit isn't great for us, I'll give you that. But it's arguably worse for EU member states. And excluding our top professors and academics from Horizon will only hurt European scientific expertise. But again, Brussels are so nakedly political, they don't care. This Cold War with the EU has got to stop. We're out, folks. Get over it. Move on, baby. We can enjoy our independence and sovereignty and establish a global footprint whilst also pursuing a deep economic, scientific, cultural and security partnership with the EU. With France, with Germany, with Italy, with Spain, all great nations. Brexit can be a success, not just for Britain, but for the EU too. But they're going to have to stop playing these games. You don't have to be a scientist to realise this trivial soap opera doesn't help anyone. What's your view? Mark at gbnews.uk. I'll get to your messages shortly. Let's speak now to my brilliant panel. We've got Nigel Nelson, who is the political editor of 2 top British newspapers, The Sunday People and The Sunday Mirror, both cracking reads. I'm also delighted to welcome back to the show Lynn May, who is a political and social commentator and svelte historian, man about town and clothes horse, nonetheless. It is the wonderful David Oldroyd-Bolt. David, can I start with you? Your reaction to the possible exclusion of the United Kingdom from the Horizon Science Project?
Never has an analogy been more often proved than that between us leaving the European Union and a much-abused spouse deciding to leave a relationship. And, as ever, the European Union proves itself absolutely incapable of magnanimity, absolutely incapable of accepting that the relationship is at an end, and proves itself incapable of restraining its obviously vindictive inherent nature. as you say, it doesn't seem to care much about its member states. What it cares about is building itself up into a supranational bloc to give itself delusions of grandeur that it could possibly compete with the United States, Russia, China, etc. I think if the European Union cared about scientific innovation, it would wish this relationship to continue. It does not. It cares about proving a point to the remaining nations of the European Union that if you try to leave, we will punish you. And if you have the temerity to think that life on the outside is possible, we will do all we can to make your life difficult and horrid and impoverished. We mustn't give in to this. The fundamental of it is, rightly, as you said, that it is a blackmailing attempt. We cannot give in to it, we mustn't give in to it, and the European Union must be shown, we must show, in fact, the other member states of the European Union that if you wish to leave, because you no longer find it advantageous, or you simply dislike the culture within it, there is life on the outside, and indeed, should those Central European states, which are constantly berated by the European Union, wish to join, we would be there waiting for them on the outside with open arms.
Lynn May, you could argue that us Brits are a bit hypocritical. We're guilty of double standards. Why should we seek these privileges without the commitment and duties of EU membership? We're trying to have our cake and eat it again.
Well, I think that the EU actually would benefit from still working with us. I echo what David said, that we have the best universities in Europe. We only have to go to the USA and other countries to partner up in terms of financing these projects. And I think that they're going to shoot themselves in the foot. They are desperately trying to cling on, again, brilliant analogy, like a desperate partner trying to hold on to a relationship. We are going, and for the simple fact that their behaviour is allowing other countries that are considering leaving the EU, they're seeing what their behaviour is actually all about, and I'm glad for that, if anything.
Well, Nigel Nelson, any words of defence for the EU on this one?
Well, only that Horizon is an EU institution and we're no longer in the EU. I mean, we're facing that there was always going to be a cost to Brexit. It doesn't mean that voting for it was wrong. If you wanted British sovereignty, that was fine. Taking back control, in Dominic Cummings' immortal words. But there's a cost that comes with it. And Remainers such as me didn't think it was a price worth paying. But you can understand that we can't join different clubs in Europe now we've left it. We can't send migrants back to France because we no longer have a deal with France. These are all the kind of costs that we must pay for Brexit. Doesn't mean Brexit wasn't worthwhile. It just means we have to accept there are pluses and minuses.
Very interesting debate. Let's carry on that debate on email if we can, mark@gbnews.uk. My Mark Meets guest next, waiting in the wings, Nigel Farage's former right-hand man. He wrote the 2010 UKIP manifesto, which was incredibly popular. You could argue the manifesto that changed the world. Of course, it contained the fundamental roadmap to Brexit, which has now happened. David Campbell Bannerman, what a character. One of Britain's most outspoken politicians is next. So don't go anywhere. Plus the papers at exactly 10:30 sharp. So get the kettle on. I'll see you in 2.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan tonight, and it's time for this. Yes, it's my daily interview slot. It's Mark Meets, in which we speak to the biggest names in the world of politics, sport, showbiz and beyond. Tonight, one of the most fearless and principled politicians in the country, former deputy leader of UKIP and author of their 2010 election manifesto, David Campbell Bannerman. David is also a top communications executive and is chairman of the Conservative Democratic Organisation. David Campbell Bannerman, welcome to Mark Dolan tonight.
Good evening, Mark. Thanks for the invitation.
A delight to have you on the programme. You have fought for Brexit for decades. How do you feel it's going?
Well, it'd be nice if we can complete it. We've still got the Northern Ireland Protocol to sort out. And, we are the United Kingdom and we represent all the 4 nations. We can't leave one of them behind with EU law and ruled by the European Court of Justice. So I think it's a really important issue to sort the protocol out. And also we've got the retained EU law bill, which is to get rid of 4,000 EU laws or reform them. That's got to get through Parliament, through Westminster. So there's work going on and we're saving the money. £191 billion on the COVID programme the EU has come up with. That would be our share, 191 billion, about 1.5 NHS's. So, we're getting some of the benefits, but there's a lot more to come.
Indeed. Brexit, David, needs a new PR department, doesn't it? Because it's being characterised as a disaster. And my concern is that that message is starting to stick, even if it's not true.
I agree with you, Mark. I mean, I'm surprised the government, whether it's under Boris or Rishi Sunak, isn't doing more to sell Brexit. It should be mentioned day in, day out, because it is a central policy of the government. And whether you like it or not, it's not rerunning the referendum. It is actually saying, well, these are the benefits of Brexit. And they're not really mentioning it enough, and they really need to push it. And, we need to get some of the myths, let's put it politely, countered. There's a lot of nonsense about the economy. We've had 2 years when we've led the world, the G7. We were the fastest growing economy for 2 years. And now like the BBC, I'm afraid, has been reporting some sort of economic disaster. We are going to low growth, which does actually illustrate why we need to cut taxation, in my view, and was part of the big debate with Liz Truss, etc. But let's get some of these some of this nonsense countered and shot down, rather like the balloon shoot being shot down over America.
Well, yes, because I don't like Brexit being mischaracterised. I want the truth about Brexit, but I don't want Project Doom. And I say that, David, as someone that voted Remain. I voted Remain because I thought there would be short-term economic impacts. I knew in the long term we'd be fine. But the bottom line is that, unlike so many in the media particularly, I accepted the result, and I want Brexit to be a great success. You've quoted some quite extraordinary figures there. Did you say that if we were still in the EU, we would be responsible for a shared bill of almost 200 billion?
Well, that wouldn't be shared. The 191 billion would be our share of the wider EU program, vaccine program. So we would be in for that. And our budget contribution would be up with the paying for their army, which they claim wouldn't exist, and the border force and environmental measures. No, I mean, it's a nonsense. And I think rejoining is a nonsense. We've got some really good benefits coming through now, like free ports, 75,000 jobs in Scotland alone, in just 2 free ports, for example. So we've got to sell these, and the government's got to start selling it harder, I believe.
Well, indeed, and I've been selling Brexit since that fateful day in 2016 because I'm a Democrat. And also part of me thinks, and I thought at the time, there were always strong arguments for Brexit. I was worried about economic disruption, but it's a transition. What are you going to expect? The bottom line is that Brexit is an insurance policy against ever closer union, being part of the United States of Europe, an insurance policy against a single European army, an insurance policy against payments of £20 billion a year, which is over 2 decades the cost of the pandemic in this country. An insurance policy against so many things. Obviously, our trade policy is ours now. However, David, notwithstanding these positives, what would you say to those who run small businesses who are being affected by Brexit, who can't export to the EU anymore? What about the businesses that are broke or closed because of Brexit? What would you say to them?
Well, look, I mean, I wouldn't argue that it's all perfect one way. And there are some small businesses that have got more paperwork. I accept that. But let's put it in context. And this is not often done. It's only 7% of the British economy, 7%, that actually trades in goods with the EU. You've got another 6%, which is services, but they're not subject to tariffs and quotas and the sort of border controls so much. They get licensing. So 7% of our economy is affected with some more paperwork, and the smaller companies do, it's more of a hassle. I do accept that. But, we are saving big money now and cutting tariffs. 20% tariffs on bananas have gone, for example. Just one small example. But I mean, that means a lot in terms of cost of living, and there's more tariffs that could be cut over time. I'm a great believer of free trade and some of these free trade deals that we're doing at the moment.
You and Nigel together changed the constitutional direction, path of this country immeasurably. In 2010, you wrote the manifesto, the UKIP manifesto. You were Nigel's deputy. Tell me about your partnership with the big man.
I have huge regard for Nigel. I think I've seen him up close in the European Parliament as an MEP. He showed enormous courage. He's right down the front, surrounded by all these presidents of the Parliament and the Council, and the Commission was like, the President of the Commission was 5 yards away from him, or 5 meters. And he used to say to me, the noise, he would say, he got barracked so much, but he showed enormous tenacity and courage. And I think he deserves greater recognition, to be honest. I think he should be knighted, in my view. But let's not forget, though, that the Conservative Party did actually pull it off, that many were sympathetic to the same kind of view, argued for the referendum, and in the end it was the referendum that got us out the European Union. So I've seen it from both sides, with UKIP, a campaign group for it, and actually arguing for a referendum. I came back from UKIP to argue for a referendum. And I'm delighted we got it. But then we had to obviously win it. And that was another whole game, you know, and a very huge challenge. But it was amazing. And at the end of the day, it did come down to the British people. It was the British people decided, not Nigel, not me, not individuals. It was the British people. And I salute their courage. And they were right to do it. And we need to deliver those Brexit benefits now for their sakes.
What were your emotions when you woke up to the news on that fateful day in 2016 that we were out?
Relief and thanking the British people. I was actually at the Count in Manchester, wonderful building, a bit like sort of Westminster. They use it in a lot of films. I was there and it was incredible. And suddenly you're surrounded by 50, 60 cameramen and 4 TVs or 5 TVs and of TV cameramen all shooting, and you went around the world. Actually, those pictures went around the world. But I just salute the British people. It was relief, really. I mean, I believe in putting my country first. That's what's driven me through whatever I've done with this. And thank God we got out, because the choice was actually superstate, full steam ahead to the superstate with the army and, you know, signing up to the euro, or getting out and being a respectable sovereign nation like Canada or United States or Australia. And, you know, we're doing fine in those terms, and we can do a lot better.
David, a thrill to have you on the show. Let's chat again soon. My thanks to wonderful David Campbell Bannerman, fascinating guy, former deputy leader of UKIP, the author of that fateful 2010 manifesto which sowed the seeds of Brexit. Thank you, David. Your reaction, Mark at gbnews.uk. Do you have any Brexit buyer's regret? What's your appraisal of the project so far? I would argue it's a success because we're out. It was delivered. Clearly some tweaks, including the Northern Ireland Protocol, but we're getting there. That's my view. What's yours? Next up, we've got the papers. Don't go anywhere.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
As a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan Tonight. It's time now for this. Yes, indeed, hot off the press, we've got tomorrow's papers, and brilliant new director on the show, Ran, is going to take us through them. So, Ran, let's start, shall we, with the Times newspaper. By the way, Ran's doing a great job. Can I just have a note to management? He's much better than Sebastian. The Times. Water firms to be spared threats of £250 million fines. Water companies are set to avoid big fines for spilling sewage into rivers and seas as ministers fear that multi-million-pound penalties could backfire. Therese Coffey, the Environment Secretary, is understood to believe that the fines of up to £250 million are disproportionate, and she's backing away from the plans. A consultation due to open soon is expected to provide an opportunity to weaken these fines as regulators argue against crazy high penalties. Now, the Times newspaper is launching a Clean It Up campaign to push the governments and polluters to clean up rivers, lakes and beaches. However, it looks like they've got their work cut out in relation to that project. Truss backers urge Hunt to boost growth with tax cuts. Dozens of Tory supporters of Liz Truss will submit a tax-cutting manifesto to Jeremy Hunt before the budget as they increase pressure on the Chancellor to do more to boost growth. One of the most prominent insisted today that the former Prime Minister's mini-budget was not to blame for the market turmoil that forced her from office, and the case for immediate tax cuts remains sound. Sir John Redwood called for sensible targeted tax cuts for businesses, on pensions and for the self-employed, and said that dozens of MPs were signing up to a group that's seeking a smaller state. They are called the Conservative Growth Group, who I suppose could be the reincarnation of the ERG. I'll be asking Nigel about that shortly. The Daily Mail next. Secret plot to unravel Brexit. Lord Frost tonight warned of a plot to undermine Brexit after leading Remainers held a secret summit on EU relations. The Tory peers said the gathering of prominent politicians, business chiefs and ex-civil servants showed a will to unravel the deal that he helped negotiate with Brussels is a clear and present danger to the project. And in a clear attack on the government, he said ministers did not need to fix Brexit, but rather implement Brexit in full, instead of raising taxes. The Sun now. While rescue miracles continue, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, praises Sun readers as their Quake appeal tops £1 million. Well done to everyone at the Sun for raising that astonishing amount of money for such an important cause. Thanks a million is the headline. The Guardian now. Labour condemns catalogue of waste on government credit cards. Luxury trips and meals among items billed to the taxpayer, analysts find. Also, BBC Chair's position increasingly untenable. We know that Richard Sharp organised a loan to Boris Johnson, £800,000. Now he's the chairman of the BBC. Are the two connected? Is there anything to see here? We'll debate that shortly too. The Eye newspaper. Sunak facing Tory rebellion over sewage in UK rivers. So that's the old sewage story back there, covered, of course, in the Times. But the Eye is saying PM facing defeat in the House of Lords over his bid to scrap clean water regulations as part of the post-Brexit bonfire of EU red tape. Laws have been in place since 2000 and set environmental standards for all inland and coastal waterways across Europe. The Independent. Murder hunt after girl stabbed to death. And BBC board to consider chairman's future as cash for Boris backlash grows. Metro. It's a murky business. Pressure grows for BBC chief to step down. Also, the most shocking and appalling headline. Buried alive, 150 hours. Moment Quake toddler rescued. Safe at last. A very, very small child who was under the rubble for 150 hours was rescued by medics. The Financial Times, China balloons cross Taiwan airspace very frequently and also building flaws. Turkey arrests developers over fears poor standards led to a higher death toll. The Daily Star is our final newspaper, last but not least. 15-degree Valentine's Day. Phew la la. Roses are red, violets are blue. Sorry, Paris will be much hotter than Vous on Valentine's Day. Merci very much. That's right. The UK will be hotter than the city of love, Paris. Fantastic news. Those are your front pages. Let's get reaction now from the political editor of the Sunday People and the Sunday Mirror, Nigel Nelson, social and political commentator Lynn May, and historian and broadcaster David Oldroyd Bolt. Let's have a look at this. It really is one of the big stories. It dominates the Times and the newspaper, Lynn. Water firms to be spared threats of £250 million fines. As far as I'm concerned, when it comes to cleaning up our rivers, I think these fines should be unlimited. What's your view?
The thing is, it's a vicious cycle, because if these fines are enforced and they are incredibly high, I think that the government is afraid that they will scare off the investors, but also then they'll have a better excuse to not upgrade, and they need desperately to be upgraded. So they'll say, if we have to pay for all of this, how do you expect us to do both?
Are there parallels with the windfall tax, David, which might be well-intentioned but could backfire?
I don't see the parallels. I'm entirely in agreement with you that these fines should be levelled. This is the Conservative Party. What are they seeking to conserve, if not our natural waterways, if not our rivers, if not the trout streams, the chalk streams, which have been likened to England's Amazon? They're an absolutely unparalleled natural resource. And Therese Coffey is, I'm afraid, just playing into the worst stereotypes of money-minded conservatism here. We must conserve these things. It's why, when I was on your programme on the 2nd of January, I nominated Fergal Sharkey as my Great Britain, because he has essentially taken on this campaign himself and got it to the level that they can now be threatened with fines. And if the water companies don't take responsibility for the rubbish they've pumped into our systems over the years, then they must be fined.
These issues are always more complex than at first glance, though, aren't they? And the government are effectively in partnership with these firms to clean up our rivers. And therefore, it is a collaboration. And that might be Lynn's point.
Indeed. And the Environment Agency, which is the overall body which regulates this, has over the years had to pay fines itself. But these water firms have the day-to-day responsibility for what they're letting come out of the system and into the rivers. Now, there is also a problem with the Highways Agency, which is not maintaining the bulwark at the side of roads, motorways particularly, for stopping sewage and other pollution slipping in from cars. So it's a multi-agency problem. But if you have to start somewhere, start with the water companies, start with the people who bear the greatest degree of day-to-day responsibility.
Yeah, I don't get Sunak's point either. Him trying to scrap clean water regulation.
This is something a bit different. This is different. What they're doing there is that it's a bonfire of all the EU laws that we merged into British law, and the idea is to get rid of all these by the end of the year. They've identified about 3,700 that ought to go. Trouble is that things like clean water laws are part of them. Those were laws that we adopted because that came from Europe, and it's only the tip of the iceberg. You're talking about 265,000 bits of EU legislation, directives, agreements, treaties.
Issues around building safety, preventing
all those things,
another tragic fire in an apartment block.
Dangerous toys, for instance.
But can't we have our own regulations?
Yes, we can, but the problem is that you've then got to get... What we did was, to make it easy for business, we just wholesale took EU law and said that's now British law. Now we're going to strip it out. So what it means is that these ones get lost without any vote by MPs. It'll just be taken away. So we lose that until they then bring back primary legislation to return them back into British law. The danger is we'll miss some along the way, and it could have disastrous consequences.
Well, I must ask, what have our civil servants been doing in the past 6-7 years, if not paying some attention to issues like this? Why has there not been a unit given the responsibility for looking through those 265,000 pieces of legislation and putting forth to Parliament, which we should keep? On your point that Parliament won't get a vote, yes, but in most cases they didn't get a vote on them coming in. They were grandfathered in great chunks of legislation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's not pretend that there's some kind of democratic deficit here, which some are trying to do. And in the case of something like water cleanliness, it's not difficult to get a bill on the statute through Parliament and on the statute book quickly to deal with this, and in fact to fine-tune the legislation to make it more specific to Britain and not a generalised European ordinance.
There is so much of this that what they're going to do it by secondary legislation, which means it makes it much quicker, but MPs don't get a chance to scrutinise it.
Well, indeed, but look, I come back to the point that we have a civil service for a reason. They should be doing this, and MPs, perhaps whether it's within select committees... Well, of course there is. We're leaving a trading bloc of which we've been a member for many, many years. There's going to be a lot of work to do. This shouldn't deter us from doing the work. We shouldn't be keeping things on the statute book simply because it's a very difficult task to remove them and then decide what we want to replace it.
The Times newspaper, Nigel, this is your wheelhouse. Truss backers urge Hunt to boost growth with tax cuts, including the influential Tory backbencher Sir John Redwood. There's trouble brewing, isn't there?
Yes, there is. And I mean, the Tory party keep doing this. They keep forming these little groups.
COVID Recovery Group, ERG, Northern Research Group.
All of those, absolutely. So what they tend to be is a thorn in the side of whichever Prime Minister has to actually deal with it. The idea of this is all part of Liz Truss's big comeback. And she's trying to clean up her legacy and say, look, I was right all along. I may have got the timing a bit wrong. I may have gone a bit far, but the market meltdown was nothing to do with me, which is obviously nonsense, because it was. It happened immediately after the mini-budget, which was such a disaster. But anyway, the basic aim of this particular group is their argument, and it's a simple economic one. They say growth comes from lower taxation. Economists reckon that that is probably wrong, and especially at a time of high inflation, what you don't do is pump money back into the economy.
Although the IMF have essentially been quite pessimistic about Britain's economic forecasts for next year, and they've included the high burden of taxation as one reason why we'll have lower growth.
Well, I mean, they also blamed a number of other things. That they blame Brexit for it. There's a whole host of reasons we're not growing. The point basically is that, yes, you're right, that if you, in ideal times, if you put more money in, the economy starts to grow. But while we've got high inflation, if you put more money in, inflation goes up.
So you think that the tax cuts are inflationary?
Yes. So what you do is you get rid of... So the idea is, Rishi Sunak's idea, which I tend to support, is that you get inflation under control, then you can move to tax cuts, and that would then help growth, yes.
Which is exactly what Margaret Thatcher did in 1980.
Yeah, that's right, yes.
So it's a bit of tough love, a bit of unpleasant medicine for the first couple of years.
But let's just be a little specific. You said economists say tax cuts don't help the economy grow. Some economists would say that, some would say that you have to look at the overall burden of taxation. I think what we need to look at specifically is not personal taxation in this instance for the moment, but corporation taxes, but capital gains taxes, but inheritance taxes, other non-inflationary taxation or forms of tax cut we can implement that makes this country appear more attractive internationally, that allows people to keep more of their money generationally, and that stops people essentially feeling a long-term pinch. We've seen reports in the papers over this weekend about large companies deciding not to base themselves here or to move abroad because of the forecast corporation tax increase. That, I would say, is something that could be reversed without there being an immediate inflationary effect.
Lynn may have had an idea. Liz Truss, she was right all along, bring her back.
No, see, I
The ultimate comeback.
I don't hide. I liked Liz Truss policies. I think that they were innovative, they were bold, they were courageous. However, the community...
Bonkers too.
No, the community... Yeah, but the whole point of the Conservative Party is to have that sort of lower taxes. That's why they were voted in, along with conserving a lot of Conservative principles. That's not being done now, and I can't really tell the difference between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, if I'm honest with you. And I think if they have any leeway, especially with John Redwood, who I absolutely love, they will get a lot of backing for the simple fact, whether you didn't like her policies or not, that's essentially who was wanted. Sunak is unelected, and that is a major issue as well. So I think if we are going to see maybe tone down Liz Truss policies, she was a bit too fervent, a bit too bull in a china shop. She should have taken her time, but I still stand by her policies.
So what do you think of Sunak now, Sunak and Hunt? Have they been a disappointment to you?
I can see why they're doing what they're doing. We have to be measured, especially in these unprecedented times. However, I don't think that they have the backing of the electorate. I don't think Hunt is very popular either. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
A fascinating conversation which will continue after the break. We've got more stories from the papers. Also, a couple of issues we're going to debate. Swearing in the workplace, what's your view on that? Is it a sackable offence? Also, does being nice get you anywhere? That plus lots more stories from the papers. See you in 3.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back to the show, reacting to the big stories of the day. My fantastic panel of Nigel Nelson, who's the political editor of the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday People. He is the longest-serving political editor in the country. Not because he's good, but because he's very hard to sack. Absolute bulletproof contract. Also, the unemployable David Oldroyd-Bolt, who is a top historian and a very good friend of mine, supreme political commentator Lynn May. Now, I'm glad you guys didn't swear at my insulting introduction there, because an employment tribunal has ruled that swearing in the workplace is no longer a big deal. An account manager claimed at a hearing that a colleague said the F word, but the judge said the comment was fairly commonplace and had a lack of significance. So, you're allowed to say F, according to a top court. It begs the question, is swearing in the workplace acceptable? Is it unacceptable? Is it a sackable offence? Lynn, what the F do you think?
Oh, I think we should just read the room. People know, especially if you're an adult in the workplace, when and when not to say certain things. And I think there's a huge difference between swearing at someone like F you and realising there was a horrible email that came in and you're not going to be on time and you're like, oh, for sake.
Yeah.
There's a big difference.
This bleak printer has run out of paper.
There you go. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think if we start to nitpick at every single thing that we can do in the workplace, it's just going to be so miserable. And we spend more of our time in the workplace than we do with our own friends and family. So we can't be too restrictive on what we can and can't do.
But don't you think swearing in the workplace is unprofessional? It's a sign of uncontrolled emotion and it's vulgar.
No, I don't agree.
No, it's adjectives. I mean, you're using it...
You come from Fleet Street, which is a veritable sewer.
But it's also changed a lot. I mean, there's a lot less swearing around. And I think that what happens with something like that is that it goes through different phases. So if you go back to medieval times, it was religious swearing. That was far more serious than sexual swearing.
Anything blasphemous.
Now it's... Yeah, if I said gadzooks, I can get away with it on this programme. I wouldn't have been able to had we been broadcasting in the Middle Ages. But if I used a sexual swear word, you'd chuck me off. So there is a difference. Now it's so common on TV, if it's used descriptively rather than actually as an attack on someone, I don't think there's any big deal anymore.
Broadcasting in the Middle Ages, that's how many TV critics describe GB News. But let me ask you, Nigel, careful, you're not supposed to laugh at that.
No, I know, but it's a good joke.
Bless you. Let's imagine you're at an editorial meeting and you're discussing stories. You know, if you were to say, you know, oh, the XXX, the bleep, bleep, bleep Prime Minister, I mean, would it raise eyebrows now?
I probably wouldn't say it any longer. And I think that... I mean,
did you used to then? You said any longer?
Yes, no, I think that we did used to swear an awful lot more, but I think you're absolutely right. It depends on the circumstances you're in. There are certain people... I'd say I would swear in front of certain shadow cabinet ministers and cabinet ministers, but not others. It depends on the person.
But weren't times a bit more fun back in the day, in the smoke-filled rooms of Fleet Street, when it was people were effing and jeffing, the likes of Kelvin Mackenzie in his pomp? Wasn't that a more fun era when people could just express themselves?
Yeah, well, I've worked for about 30 editors, and it rather depends on which one you choose that was a fun time.
It's interesting, isn't it, with those editors? They go and you stay.
Yeah. What I don't want them to find out is that I'm the connection.
I know, exactly right. Cross this man at your peril. What do you think about this, David? Swearing in the office?
Oh, I don't think there's any particular problem with it, other than that it's desperately unoriginal. When you can swear everywhere with impunity, why not do something a little more interesting?
Like what?
Well, just use your vocabulary. There are something like 5 million words in the English language. Why not stretch it a bit instead of using the same 12?
Yeah.
And you can actually be much subtler if you don't swear, I think. And if you really dislike someone, it's easier to tell them that without them realising if you don't swear.
Yeah, but this is talking about expression on when, for example, there's no more paper. What words would you use? It's more of a just to get it out. You wouldn't...
Well, if you
use interesting words for...
Do you swear, David? I've never actually heard you swear.
But I try to do it
I've heard him swear.
Actually, I don't...
Creatively, elegantly.
Yes, exactly. Actually, Hugo Rifkin wrote a really decent piece on this in The Times a couple of years ago.
Unusual?
Yes, I know. It was one of his few that was actually worth reading. But talking of editors, well, of course, it depends on context, because while Kelvin Mackenzie may have sworn all day long, I don't know, I never worked for him, and Paul Dacre certainly is reputed to have done, I think it would not have been the case of Charles Moore or William Rees-Mogg. So I think, you know, these things all depend on a little bit of context. And whether it's all male company, whether it's a mixed company, whether it's female company, depends, I think, on the type of swearing that's permissible either professionally or socially. There are certain words that now men should not use, I would say, because I'm old-fashioned, in the company of women, that they would be able to use, and it would be perfectly fine in the company only of men. Equally, perhaps there are words that women would use only in the company of other women that they wouldn't use in the company of men.
I like to hear someone swear that you would never think would swear.
Well,
it's like...
Yes.
Or just, I used to work for this really uptight CEO, and everything would be prim and proper, and one day she lost it and she said F, and we were like, yes.
Well, exactly. That's right. It has a little more meaning, therefore.
Well, Stephen Fry is great when he swears, because he's so eloquent that when he says it, then... You do laugh because he says it like Oscar Wilde or something. And some comedians get praised for not swearing in their act, like Peter Kay. Many people love that. We're going to discuss whether being nice gets you anywhere. Well, all three of you are nice and you've done quite well, so I think we've answered that one. Can I thank my wonderful panel of David Oldroyd-Bolt, Lynn May and Nigel Nelson. Really enjoyed your company all of this weekend. Thank you so much for all of the emails, of course, listening on DAB+ radio. I am back on Friday at 8 o'clock for Mark Dolan tonight. Next weekend we shall spend together. Can't wait for that. The week after, I'll be looking after Dan Wootton tonight. So look at lots and lots of stories. It never gets boring here at GB News or on Mark Dolan tonight. Let me tell you that headliners with tomorrow's papers are next. See you soon.
Good evening, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to our latest weather update from the Met Office. It's been quite a cloudy day today and that's not going to change too much as we head overnight, though it will remain dry for most. Now all this settled weather is due to this high pressure that we've had across the UK for some time now, but as we head towards about midweek we might just start to see some fronts creeping in from the west. But back to tonight, and it's quite a cloudy picture once again. We might see a few clear spells across northern and western areas through tonight, and here we could see some patchy mist and fog forming. Remaining dry though, as I say, and quite mild too, with only a patchy frost in some rural areas, particularly in the north and east. So quite a mild and cloudy start to the new working week, though as we go through the morning, that mist and fog will lift and break, as will the cloud, making for a much brighter afternoon. So plenty of sunny spells across the UK for the second half of Monday. Temperatures will be around or just above average for the time of year, with highs of around 10 to 12 in the south. Now looking ahead to Monday evening, and there'll be plenty of clear spells around through Monday evening. And this could lead to some mist and fog forming, particularly across East Anglia and South East England. Now looking further west, and cloud and outbreaks of rain will start to move in from the west as we head into the start of Tuesday. So a milder night here, but cooler in the east under clear skies, and it's here we could once again see a patchy rural frost. So a cool start in the east on Tuesday, but with plenty of sunny spells. Cloud making its way in from the west, just bringing some outbreaks of light rain and drizzle across northern and western areas to start Tuesday. And the weather isn't set to change too much throughout the rest of next week, although we might see some rain around midweek, and temperatures will remain at or just above average.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join my show Farrah, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farrah.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamonn Holmes back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamonn. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamonn Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, welcome back. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. The US military has shot down another high-altitude object over Lake Huron in Michigan. An anonymous senior official says the object had octagonal shape, was unmanned and travelling about 20,000 feet, but it's unclear whether it had surveillance capabilities. It's the fourth time an unidentified object has been brought down over US and Canadian territories in recent days. The first one was a suspected Chinese spy balloon, but officials say they're still analysing the wreckage. The number of people who've been killed in the earthquakes that hit Turkey and Syria on Monday has risen to 33,000. Officials say the window for finding survivors is closing, but several children were pulled from the rubble alive today, including a 9-year-old boy who spent almost a week under a collapsed building. An appeal by the UK's Disasters Emergency Committee has raised more than £60 million in just 3 days. A girl and boy, both aged 15, have been arrested on suspicion of murder following the fatal stabbing of a 16-year-old girl in a park in Cheshire. Brianna Ghey from Warrington was found by members of the public with serious injuries on a pathway near Culcheth Linear Park yesterday afternoon. Emergency services arrived, but she died at the scene. The Labour Party is urging the BBC chair to consider his position after MPs found he breached standards when applying for the role. A cross-party committee says Richard Sharp made significant errors of judgment when he failed to declare that he'd helped Boris Johnson to secure a loan when he was Prime Minister. Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell is questioning whether he's still able to uphold trust and independence in the broadcaster.
I think this damning report, it really is an unprecedented report, means that Mr Sharp's position is increasingly untenable, and he really should now reflect on whether he's able to carry out that very important role as the BBC chair to uphold public trust and independence of the BBC.
You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now, though, it's time for headliners.